we have this topic for tonight, using psychological safety to drive change. We have actually been asked in a few occasions recently to say something, to participate in discussions about this psychological safety. It's also very hot in the media here. People are writing articles about it. Amy Edmundson's book, The Fearless Organization, have been translated into Danish. So every man and his dog is discussing this topic. So we thought we would use the opportunity to also talk a little bit about it on this webinar here. So let's try and get started. I'll share a screen here. You should see the opening page here. And the first step is really just to narrow the field a little bit and say we're homing in on psychological safety in Agile, or when we work in an Agile fashion. We work with Scrum, or we have other frameworks perhaps, but how does psychological safety apply here? And first of all, what is Agile really? What is the Scrum Master really? Because this is kind of important to agree on, and it's there are all sorts of opinion on what Agile is. And of course, you can read the Agile Manifesto from 20 years ago, or you could go down to the blue field at the bottom, where one of the original people here, Kent Beck, said, well, in my definition, Agile is you accept input from reality and you respond to it. So that really can't be more basic than that, can it? That you accept reality as it is and you try to deal with it, instead of being delusional or sticking to arcane theories. So, and then what is the Scrum Master? And again, this is what you can take out of the Scrum Guide: servant, leader, facilitator, coach, manager, etc. Conductor of the orchestra, a trainer. Some people call him a chief operating officer. And here I'm allowing myself to quote Paul, and Scrum Master is a gardener of improvement, a leader through service. It may not be a 100% correct quote, but I thought that was the gist of it. So a gardener of improvement, and that statement, I guess, comes from Stanley McChrystal, an American general who came to Iraq in 2003, discovered that he couldn't really cope with Al-Qaeda, and he had to change the organization of that army, that coalition that he was trying to lead. And one of the things was that he had to change. Although he's a 4-star general, he had to change his behavior from being the chess master moving people around to being the gardener making these changes possible. And it's sort of the claim here that with psychological safety, again, we can't force it. You can't squeeze it out of people. You can't squeeze it into them, but you can be a gardener and prepare the soil for it. In Scrum, of course, the Scrum Master has the responsibility of dealing with these things, how people work together. So naturally, a lot of this that we're talking about this evening falls back on the Scrum Master and says, what can you do about it? Or how can you facilitate? How can you be the gardener of this through service? So move forward. Some of you have probably seen similar drawings from us before, but we just want to repeat it once again, what the challenges for organizations are these days, and why do we need this stuff? This is how we often are presented. Here's a goal, here's your bike, pump it, get on it, and get out there. How hard can it be? And maybe our boss tells us that, our board, our bank, our auditor, whatever. And we know that in reality, perhaps it's more like this. It's not a straight road. There's lots of surprises. The poor guy on the bike has no idea that that there's a boat ride involved in this. And if this is correct, that reality is often like that, then why is it? The unpleasant fact is that we have much less control than we like to believe. And there's lots of reasons for it: technological, globalization, Putin on the loose, Corona, all sorts of things hit us with the unknown, and we have to come up with new solutions. All in all, there's a lot of complex challenges, and we'll talk about a little bit about complexity, but not too much tonight. We'll get lost in that. But complexity means that we only have fragmented knowledge, but we have to do something anyway. And in order to discover solutions for that, that requires engagement from people and all participants that are involved in order to find effective solutions. Fairly obvious, but that's not what we have. If we go to Gallup, you can find that in their reports that about 85% of the global workforce, they're disengaged. That means they show up reasonably on time, they go home reasonably on time, and they more or less do what they're told. But they take the back seat. They don't engage fully. Of those, the 18% are actively disengaged, which in Gallup's terms means that they hang around the water cooler or the coffee machine and they spread messages sort of opposite of where we would really like to go. And that's of course a scary number. A similar thing is that sometimes we waste our effort because we don't really focus on what people need, what customers need. In larger projects, the Standish Group found more than 10 years ago, and I don't think it's changed that much. I haven't been able to find any newer data, but as they came to the conclusion in larger projects or larger organizations, 50 to 70% of the effort was wasted because what was made was not really used. Nobody wanted it anyway. Again, then we have a lot of bureaucracy, and all in all, we have to conclude that the way we manage stuff today is probably outdated. It worked quite well during most of the 20th century, the industrial society and mass production, but we need to think differently. And the claim is that we need to think of the values in lean: customer focus, removing waste, respect for people. People need to be involved with intrinsic motivation, purpose, autonomy, and mastery. And we need to push authority as far out as we can find people who can carry it. Good old Deming, that's our hero in many ways, a grandfather, not great grandfather of Agile, we call him. And we must preserve the power of intrinsic motivation, dignity, cooperation, curiosity, joy, and learning that people are born with. So his claim is that we are born with these things, but in organizations we can de-skill people so they lose them again. So how can we do that? How can we make a difference? And just quickly repeating, traditionally we have the hierarchy: man at the top, some middle managers, some people at the bottom where the work happens. What goes down are commands, resources, and control, and what goes up are reports and deliverables. The hierarchy exists to secure compliance and predictability so that everybody does what they're told and stick to the plan. And that creates an extremely stable environment, but extreme stability is not what we need when we need to change. Then it gets hard. And what's the proposal instead? Learning from Lean and Stanley McChrystal, build a network of circles, of teams, focus on the customers, build an organization of teams that serve the customers primarily. If they are organized like Scrum teams, we know that they shouldn't be too big because then we lose the benefits of the small team. So maybe we have to scale up and make them have more teams in one circle working on the same backlog, or maybe we scale out and we have someone behind the front row circles that help them and deliver stuff to them. And that's the value stream. We build a value stream of how we work together. We are clear on the relations we have, the delegations we do, and that's sort of proposal, starting with the lean principles that have been known for a long time. And to resolve any conflicts or any issues, we create a network of resolution circles where team members can meet and discuss and coordinate the tactical details. Product owners or strategy owners, as we might call them, can meet and discuss things that concern strategy. The same with operations. The Scrum Masters can meet and coordinate how we need to work inside the organization. For example, work with psychological safety. So issues and ideas and escalation goes up, and we try to resolve for the common good and delegate, and investments go down. Sometimes we need to have a secondary circle of people across these that where people have a common skill set, and they meet and they coordinate with cross-cutting concerns here. So this might be all the designers that work here. They are in different teams, and there's even one from the supplier, but they meet and they deal with those things. Some of you may have heard of Spotify and how they use the term guilds to identify people that work together on common skill sets, or communities of interest is another term. So it goes across, cuts across the value stream. The value stream is the primary thing. This is the secondary. It's still important, but nevertheless, the value stream is more important. And we also have a concept for putting together transient circles if we all of a sudden have a crisis or a sudden drop into chaos. This type of organization is built for serving the customer and always improving. And our claim is that if you develop an organization like this with focus on psychological safety, you can get an awful lot of benefits out of it. So engagement, key organizational indicator. We need people's engagement. Here's Gallup, that we mentioned Gallup before. Some of you have seen this one before. This is the Gallup Q12 questionnaire that they developed 20 years ago, but we've been using ever since to try and measure and give us a sort of a measuring rod to see how well are we doing in terms of engagement. That's one way of looking at it. And when Gallup used this, they used this these data that we saw before, that 85% disengaged. In Western Europe, it's actually slightly worse. It's about 90%. We are below sub-Saharan Africa in engagement. Then they extended the study and looked at what does it really mean in real life here when we look at engagement, and if we compare the organizations with the best, the 25% with the best engagement, with those that are lowest, we get some amazing numbers. We see how all the key numbers that you might want to look at in a company actually are involved in this, are changed by it. Absenteeism is much lower when you have engagement. People's intention to change jobs are much lower. Even a thing like shrinkage in the warehouse is lower. Safety incidents, quality defects, and of course, customer satisfaction, productivity, and profitability. So for an organization, there's tons of good reasons for focusing on this engagement. And the psychological safety is at the corner, is a cornerstone in this. These days, it's mostly promoted by Amy Edmundson, which is very popular at the time being, with books and everything, and being given prizes and awards. Professor at Harvard, but she spent 25 years studying this concept that she calls psychological safety. She's worthwhile listening to. She documents how quality in a complex work is created, that it comes from constant improvement and learning. Psychological safety and engagement and intrinsic motivation, they're all similar terms that of course has a huge overlap, and one is the precondition for the other and so forth, but they're all in the same territory. We need constant improvement and learning. That comes from engagement, she says, and that has to involve individuals on the front line, those who actually deal with the things. This is not a desk job of working with constant improvement and learning. This is a job that involves the people that actually do it. And it only happens when you have psychological safety. According to Amy Edmundson, we must be convinced, deeply convinced, that we are not punished if we make a mistake. or if we ask for help, or if we suggest a better way. I should be able to say it's fundamentally okay to be me here. Then I can participate. Then I can invest myself in improvement. Then we can start to learn while executing, according to Amy. So once we have this psychological safety in place, how can we go about it? And she claims 4 steps here. Number 1, you have some process guidelines. Although it's complex, you have some guidelines. You look at them, you follow them, you do the best you can. You work together in real time with other people so that, and you collect process data so it's transparent. How does this go? How does it work? And then you have disciplined reflection. Almost can't pronounce it. Institutionalized disciplined reflection. In Scrum, we call this retrospective. In general terms, it's a feedback. Good old Deming we saw before, he talked about plan, do, study, act. So after you've done something, you've been engaged in executing, you stop up, you study, and you act upon what you learn. What we all have to do, if this is going to be reality, we have to admit that we don't know all the answers, and we have to admit when we made a mistake. Don't cover up. Humility is a term that we don't really like too much these days. We like the strong individual, the powerful CEO, the imperial leader, the Elon Musk of the world, and Steve Jobs and what have you. And they are not necessarily characterized by humility, I would say. You need to ask questions, real questions. Don't fake it. People will know that immediately. But if we experience that other people wants to hear from us, honestly, we respond. And Google learned a lot about that. They studied to see what the perfect team was. And what they found out was, in fact, much to their surprise, in a project called Aristotle, they studied a lot of their teams. Why is it that some teams function well and some don't? And psychological safety was the dominant characteristic. It was, in fact, the foundation for all the other things that also were needed in the team. But that was the foundation of it. There's a link here. When you get this, you can read more about this from the New York Times, or there's an article here from a company that made an illustration of it where they said psychological safety, they feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other. Maybe vulnerable is slightly misused these days, but it means that I trust my team members, the people that are around me, to deal with the information I give them with respect. That leads to dependability. We get things done. We have a high bar of excellence. We have clarity. It gives us meaning, and we like to do what we do because we can see the impact. But read the Google study yourself and think about it. Here's a Amy Edmundson's 7-point survey that she's been using more or less all the years, I believe, and it's from her book. So you can use that one. At the end of this session here, we're going to give you a couple of links so that you can try it out in a certain way. Jakob, who is here with us, has created with his tool an interactive questionnaire. It's in Danish, so it really only works for the Danes. Sorry about that, but we thought we'd show it to you anyway. So that's there, and you can try to go through the questionnaire, and there's some detailed questions, and you get a score out of it. We have also made, Anna and I have made another way of using this survey, where we try to combine a method from Dave Snowden with this questionnaire here. So we ask people to tell us a little story about how psychological safety was visible or important to you, where you experienced either psychological safety or the lack thereof, and then try and judge it up against those 7 points here and says, the story I just told, does that have an impact? Does that demonstrate something about point number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? That's called self-assessment of your narratives. And we're trying to send that out to have people contribute, and we'll give you the findings later on when we've got a sufficient amount of answers. But Amy Edmundson's questionnaire is here. You can use it internally with your team. And then we now come to the point and say, what can Scrum Masters do to facilitate and to foster? The thing we talk most about is at the personal level. And a lot of people talk about that. We are going to switch it a little bit in a moment and talk about the rest of the organization. But at the personal level, there are some obvious things that you focus on, and you train yourself a little bit as a Scrum Master to demonstrate a behavior that shows that you're engaged and present. A simple thing, don't use that smartphone when other people are talking or something like that. Ask questions, and so that people will know, and then demonstrate that you're listening by giving feedback. Just a simple acknowledgement, I heard what you said. Eye contact, other little tricks in trying to make the other person feel that you are truly interested. Demonstrate that you understand. Recap statements. Ask for more understanding. One of in our network, Rene, he has this opening gambit. Whenever there's a discussion, and especially if it's slightly tense, there might be conflict here. He always opened the game by saying, "I wonder why," and then something clever. And it's okay to wonder, isn't it? That's not threatening. I'm just admitting I don't really understand it. That is an inviting sentence. It is a way of inviting people to participate and to explain their views or their statements or their position. And then demonstrate transparency and appreciation. We recommend, for example, in retrospective, to use the term or statement like, it was important to me that this and this and this. Okay, I'm showing you something of my value system. I'm trying to be open and show you who I am, honestly. And if you don't like that, okay, too bad. I mean, that's all I have. I'm not faking it. I'm not selling you something. This was important to me. That makes the team move closer. I intend to do so and so and so. Do you have any better ideas? Intent-based leadership, Marquette calls that. David Marquette, the submarine captain that is also getting a lot of attention. I intend to do so. You communicate before you've done it to people around you. You allow them to correct you if you are on the wrong track. You allow them to suggest better ways of doing it, perhaps. Or couldn't we do this instead first? And then the final thing here about showing appreciation, something that I personally feel we're not terribly good at in our home country here. We're very good at telling people off and telling them what we don't like, but we're not terribly good at showing appreciation. And that's actually really building up other people. I really like what you did there. That's a very powerful thing to express to people, and people take it to heart. Show that you're available for dialogue. Your body language should signal that. If you're not, then make it clear that you're not at the moment. But then when you are ready for dialogue, then make sure people, I can't do it right now. I'll get back to you. 10 minutes, is that okay? Or something like that. And then keep your commitment. Psychological safety is very closely related to trust as well. And as we all know, trust can be built up, takes a long time to build up, and can be wasted in few seconds. As a Scrum Master, we are trying to, of course, accommodate people, but on the other hand, not be romantic about it. We are balancing structure and flexibility. Whenever we deal with a group of people, there are also some people who needs an awful lot of structure, and some people who apparently needs an awful lot of freedom and flexibility. And we have to coexist. So find the balance. And that's why it's such a good idea that the Scrum Master is a sort of an independent person trying to facilitate this. Try and keep people on a positive communication path. Don't interrupt others. Don't let them hijack the meetings. You're facilitating it. You have the right to make sure that there's a good process. Try and create space for people to contribute. That's more or less at the personal level, and help people perform some decision making for example, what we call consultative decision making, where, okay, we believe here that Anne is the sharpest tool in the shed. She can make this decision. On the other hand, she now also has the responsibility to make sure that she's talked to everybody who might be influenced. What about the organization, the surrounding organization? What are the barriers to psychological safety? What are the measures we can take? Years ago, when we started Agile, psychological safety was more or less assumed or spontaneous. The teams were created, they were protected, and they had psychological safety internally. And then it was sort of, if the drive is strong enough, we will create that environment more or less spontaneously. They were also considered perhaps renegades or rebels, the teams, and so okay, we're different, we can do it differently, and it sort of was really spontaneous, and Scrum Masters would help them circle the wagons and make sure we have psychological safety inside here. Many of those teams that we learned about in the beginning of Scrum 20 years ago or something, today we'll probably call them transient teams because they were formed, they were doing something, and they were disbanded again. But now we're more mainstream, and so we are exposed to the rest of the organization on a more permanent basis. We have to fit in one way or another. How do we fit in and still preserve psychological safety? We have to interact with the traditional hierarchy. Sometimes we call that the line organization. And we have to look at psychological safety, not just within our little comfy team here, also in the wider perspective. And the thing that prevents psychological safety is, of course, fear and fear again. And occasionally laziness if people don't really want to work on it. But there are several kinds of fears. We can be afraid in the hierarchy, we can be afraid of our boss. He controls my destiny. We can lose something very important. We can lose face, which especially in some cultures is terribly important. Or we can be afraid of not being part of the in crowd, what is popular to be now. This is kind of tricky because we normally won't admit that one. But if people don't get psychological safety, they more or less will circle the wagons and protect themselves in an unconstructive way. So we have to get the rest of the organization on board in this process. When we interact with the traditional hierarchy, what happens? Well, remember, it's there to secure compliance and predictability. That's why it was created. It is power-based. I mean, that's the whole idea. Those at higher levels can tell those at lower levels what to do, and they can dismiss them, or they can hire and fire and control their income, etc. What often happens is that we end up separating thinking and doing. There's somebody upstairs that does the thinking for us, and we're in the doing department. And that very, very often introduces fear. Here in Scandinavia, we pride ourselves up, well, we're sort of, we're softer, we're a more feminine culture. If you ask Hofstede, the Dutch psychologist, he would call our culture more feminine dominated. And we have perhaps a more softer approach, at least in the way we talk. But I think my experience is that fear has just become more subtle and disguised. Very often there's a different kind of fear. There's a reason why we have such high level of anxiety in our society, how we have so many people sick and off work with stress. Maybe the first question we saw from Q12, do I know what's expected of me here? Maybe that's not clear because we don't want to use clear words, and then we use ambiguous, softer words, and people get confused and they suffer from anxiety. So if we have fears, immediately we will have self-protection as the primary driver. Where's our loyalty then? Is it the team? Is it the hierarchy? Another problem is that if we have fear, we will green shift information up the hierarchy. Transparency will suffer, and we might focus on looking good instead of. What can we do about this? That depends on how far the organization wants to go in the agile direction.
Kurt, there's a question. Do you want to take clarifying questions?
Yeah, well, let's go ahead. Jakob.
Thank you. It's not so much a question as a observation of what you just talked about, the Scandinavian culture and this subtleness of how do you conform to norms and standards. I read a very good study that says that even though Denmark is one of the highest rated countries as relates to happiness, I don't know how they measure that, because I know a lot of Danes that complain quite a lot, but okay. It seems that this is also a stress factor to have to comply or to have to seem very happy and that everything is always okay. Is actually a stress factor. So it becomes a social pressure component that you have to comply with being a happy nation, because that's what we're supposed to and expect it to be.
Okay, thank you very much, Jacob. That was a good point. Yeah, so moving on to towards the end here, depends on how far the organization wants to go. What can we do about this? Are we on the way to an agile company, going all the way to the value stream, the network of circles, or are we just going to try and create something that can coexist with the hierarchy that stays intact? So let's look at that for a moment. If we're on the road to an agile organization, then there are certain fears. There are some people in the existing hierarchy that will think of this as the trail of tears. What's going to happen to us, those middle managers? Where are we going to end up? What's going to happen to me? And the drawing I showed you early on with the hierarchy and the agile organization, when we present to companies, which is normally sort of our slide number 2 or 3, and we don't really get any further because everybody stops there and says, what's going to happen to those guys in the middle over there to the left? Because that's us, the middle managers. There's a lot of psychological safety that we need to attend to in this transition if we really want to change. Those in transit need psychological safety. We say that our original values includes respect, and that also we have to respect those people. Well, how will that organization transition? Well, we have to figure out where we redesign involving all colleagues. Will we have consultants come in and tell us how it's done? Or will we do it incrementally? Starts where it hurts. If in doubt, starts with the customers. The traditional hierarchy will definitely be challenged. Will I lose my position, my perks, etc.? And they are valid concerns. We have to remember that. We have to come up with a good value proposition, and the company has to do things, the organization has to do things. What will happen to these people? Well, they will become valuable players in the value stream, product owners, scrum masters, or high-performing team members, etc. The need for qualifications don't go away. However, if there are thoroughbred bureaucrats among them, okay, they are deer in the headlights. We don't need many of those. But the organization must be committed. They must denounce using fear for this transition, and all the strategies and the compensations, etc., must be in place so that people can see a value proposition. Otherwise, those in the middle of the hierarchy don't want to go there. I think we've mentioned in other scenarios that at one of our clients in Norway, those in the middle are referred to as the permafrost. Nothing happened, nothing changed there. If we still under the hierarchical governance, welcome to Indian territory. We have to accept then that there are other rules here. In the US, Indian territories had slightly different rules than those that were proper states, etc., in the 140 years ago or something. And the claim is here that if an organization just wants to have an agile bubble over here in product development, they have to face up to the fact that this is a self-governing entity next to the traditional hierarchy. We call it the territory. And they need to govern themselves. They have the right to hire and fire and negotiate salary, organize teams. The rest of the organization must accept this as a self-governing entity, and of course help them. We should define rules of engagement so we don't confuse each other, and how we deliver, how we provide transparency and visibility, and how we can draw upon other services. We should, from the territory, from the agile part of the company, have representatives at the very top level where we can resolve strategic and operational matters. Actually, quite often organizations want this but they don't want to do it explicitly. They don't really want to say that this is a self-governing territory. And my claim right now is that it doesn't work if you don't do it. It will work for some time, but then sooner or later, the empire strikes back, as one of our friends in the bank world said the other week. All of a sudden, there's this star cruiser from the empire coming in with all sorts of repercussions if you don't follow rules, and the flexibility is lost. Scrum Masters must lead from the front and show it. But remember, the rest of the organization also need the respect. This is not just for the Indian territory with the Agile part. We also have to be respectful of how the others work. One important thing is to, when you have sprint reviews, that you then demonstrate psychological safety, transparency. Sometimes we see this when people interact with customers, with stakeholders. Stakeholders have many opinions, strong opinions, and we really have to make sure that the conflicts on the stakeholders doesn't spill into the team. You have to make sure, and you have to, as a Scrum Master, protect people from having conflicts from outside coming in. And you work on psychological safety both ways. Also, the stakeholders or the customers need this. We need to agree on some enabling constraints, how we do this, and get the stakeholders involved. And sometimes teams are simply afraid of stakeholders because they're afraid of that they might be punished the other way around if they say something wrong to the customer. It has to be clear here. Again, transparency. But remember, it also goes the other way. Stakeholders can be intimidated by teams and their technical companies. It can be overwhelmed by them. So as a conclusion, and I'll stop now relatively soon, here's a statement that I actually think is pretty important to remember. The biggest concern for any organization should be when their most passionate people become quiet. Because what happens if you don't have psychological safety, you shut up and you take a backseat position, and the organization loses huge opportunities. So it's a dominant ingredient. We have to achieve organizational excellence, then psychological safety is dominant, both internally and externally. Scrum Masters, or coaches, if you prefer that, are the gardeners of this rare plant. And you really have to focus on it. And remember the rest of the organization. It's not just inside the team. You have to look outside. It says so in the Scrum Guide also, that the Scrum Masters work on coaching the rest of the organization. So here are these interactive assessments. Here's the psychological safety storytelling survey, and when you get the PDF, you can click the links here. And I think that was my part, and we still have time for a discussion. That maybe you will send people out in some breakout rooms, and
I'll send out the questions also in the chat, so that you can have them in the breakout room. So the purpose is to encourage a little bit of disciplined reflection, like Kurt said, Amy Edmundson talks about earlier. So to think about how does this apply in any of your scenarios, or is there anything that you'd like to comment on? So I will assign some breakout rooms, and feel free to join if you want.